My name is Ken Harris, and I teach at Indiana University Southeast, and along with my colleague, Ranida Harris, also from Indiana University Southeast. And if you're curious, since you see the name Harris on both of them, we are husband and wife. I was the one who was going to be attending the conference, and so now I'm doing my virtual presentation. The title of our paper is An Investigation of Entitlement and the Interaction of Entitlement and Justice on Workplace Outcomes. So what is our study about? When we hear the term entitlement, what is it you think of? Well, maybe there's lots of different ways we can think about entitlement. Sometimes we hear it in the media, we hear it talked about people are entitled, kids being entitled. And entitled individuals have been suggested to have favorable self-perceptions and reward expectations, even when they are not justified in these beliefs. So, there's lots of stories about the impact of entitlement at the workplace. And to take the entitlement further so we understand it, entitled people, it's when they're not justified to have these beliefs. So if someone's an amazingly hard worker and they expect to be promoted or to receive a large raise, well then that's based on reality. But entitled people have these favorable expectations and self-perceptions when they're not necessarily justified. So if someone was an average to below average employee, but they thought they were the best or they thought they deserved the best. So even though we know a little bit about entitlement, there's a number of unanswered questions related to it. So some of the contributions of this study are that the nomological network related to entitlement outcomes is somewhat small. So there have been some studies on entitlement and its relationship with different outcomes, but we don't know that much about a lot of outcomes. And so this study investigates the outcomes of job burnout, organizational deviance, and turnover intentions. So when we look at it, one thing that's nice about our study is we have 3 different outcomes, and they're sort of, they're differential related. So job burnout, it's more of a feeling and attitude. Organizational deviance is more of a behavior, and turnover intentions, it's a behavioral intention about the future. And hypothesis 1 of our study is that entitlement is positively related to the outcomes of job burnout, deviance, and turnover intentions. So, and the logic here is that the more entitled someone is, so think about those favorable self-perceptions and reward expectations, even when they're not earned, or especially when they're not earned. So these are the people who think they deserve the most. Well, we anticipate that those people are more likely to experience job burnout because, they work hard, or even if they're working average level, they don't think they're getting what they should from the job. And so all of a sudden they experience burnout. They're more likely to experience or be associated with organizational deviance. So maybe these people believe that, since my company isn't giving me the rewards I deserve, or I'm not receiving the benefits I deserve, then maybe I'll be deviant. I'll take a longer break. I will steal supplies. I'll treat other people not nice. And finally, these people are more likely to leave the company. So again, those favorable self-perceptions, when they're not justified, all of a sudden an employee starts thinking, my company's not treating me right. I need to get to a different workplace situation. So in hypothesis 1, we hypothesize a direct relationship between entitlement and the 3 outcomes we examine. However, based on person-situation theory, we expect that those relationships between entitlement and the outcomes are likely to change based on certain situations, which is exactly what person-situation theory says. It says that the relationship between the personality variable and outcomes changes as a function of certain situations. The 2 situations we thought were relevant for our study were distributive justice and procedural justice. Now, distributive justice is the fairness of the distribution of outcomes, and procedural justice is the fairness of the procedures. Now, based on person-situation theory, we thought for those people who are entitled, who felt like they deserved more, when distributive justice was lower, those negative outcomes were likely to be higher. So for the entitled people, when they thought they should be receiving more and more, and they thought that the fairness of the distribution of outcomes wasn't fair, they're going to automatically think, I got taken advantage of. I was in the wrong. Similarly, with procedural justice, when the procedures aren't fair. So, based on person situation, we have hypothesis 2 and 3. Hypothesis 2, distributive justice moderates the positive relationships between entitlement and our three outcomes of burnout, deviance, and turnover intentions, such as the positive relationships are stronger when distributive justice is lower. And in hypothesis 3, procedural justice moderates the positive relationships between entitlement and our outcomes of burnout, organizational deviance, and turnover intentions, such that the positive relationships are stronger when procedural justice is lower. Now our sample procedure. The sample was recruited from full-time human resource employees in 3 Brazilian cities, so Porto Alegre, Sao Paulo, and Brasilia. In each of the organizations, the HR employees work standard business hours, 8 to 5, and that is when they were expected to complete the survey. And the survey was designed in English, translated into Portuguese, and translated back in English by 2 independent translators. In total, 550 HR professionals from a wide range of organizations were contacted. Of that number, 93 declined to participate, resulting in actual pen and paper surveys being mailed to 457 of these individuals. And this was deemed easier than an online survey, just based on logistics. 2 weeks after the initial mailing, any participants who hadn't yet responded were sent a reminder mail questionnaire. In total, we received completed questionnaires from 335 HR employees, which represent an overall response rate of 61%. Our analysis technique, we used hierarchical moderated regression analyses, and there were 4 steps. In step 1, we had the 4 control variables of organizational tenure, age, gender, and hours worked per week. And we included these because we thought they were relevant to our outcomes of job burnout, organizational deviance, and turnover intentions. In step 2, we had the entitlement term. In step 3, we had the distributive justice and procedural justice terms. And in step 4, we formed our interactions by multiplying entitlement with distributive justice and entitlement with procedural justice. Now, here is just a look at our correlation matrix. You can sort of see a number of things were moderately significant. So the largest 2 significant numbers, other than the correlation of 0.65 between age and organizational tenure, which we'd expect, but the largest 2 were 0.53 and 0.55 at the top of column 2 and the top of column 4. And those are between job burnout and distributive justice, and between procedural justice and distributive justice. So having the highest correlation of 0.5 leads us to believe that common method variance was not a huge factor in our study. I acknowledge it. And here's our regression analysis results. So if you can sort of see with turnover intentions, it's the first set of numbers. We can see that entitlement was actually not significantly related to turnover intentions. However, at the very bottom, the distributive justice times by entitlement interaction was significant. In the middle grouping for organizational deviance, we can see entitlement was significantly related to organizational deviance, and the procedural justice times by entitlement outcome or interaction was significant. And in our final DV, the one on the right for job burnout, entitlement was significantly related to job burnout, and one of the interactions, procedural justice times by entitlement. So in terms of our outcomes, what we actually found was that 2 of the direct relationships between entitlement and the outcomes were significant. So that supports 2 of the 3 hypotheses in hypothesis 1. And in terms of the significant interactions, we graphed them. So you can sort of see here that the relationship between entitlement and distributive justice on turnover intentions, it almost forms an X, and where the relationship really gets strong and high is when distributive justice is low. So the positive relationship between entitlement and turnover intentions, which is a negative outcome, becomes stronger and stronger when distributive justice is low. A little bit surprisingly, when distributive justice is high, the line actually goes down. And the interaction between entitlement and procedural justice on organizational deviance. This is a little bit more what we expected, but again here we can see that positive relationship. The top solid line between entitlement and organizational deviance was stronger when procedural justice was lower. Again, the relationship between entitlement and procedural justice on job burnout, we can see that top solid line. That's when procedural justice was lower. It was much stronger. So what this means is, of our Interaction hypothesis, we supported 3 of them, 3 of the sort of 6 parts of them. So in terms of some limitations and suggestions for future research, a couple things. One, all of our variables were self-reported. So as I already mentioned, the moderate correlations, really at the highest of being 0.55, lead us to believe that common method variance wasn't a huge factor, but it was a factor. And so maybe future research could look at other reports, maybe of some of these variables. You could think of a supervisor report of organizational deviance, or a colleague. A second one, we found results, but we're unable to answer the why. In our case, we didn't really know, we didn't measure enough variables to perfectly know the why, but we did find very interesting results. So we hope future research can have designs of their studies that can answer that why. A third one, our analyses explain relatively low amounts of variance. So in total, our entitlement and interaction terms were explaining less than 20%, which is good and can have a huge bottom line impact, but we also want to say that it wasn't gigantic. A fourth one, are there unique things about employees in Brazil? So, it's very nice to expand the research stream. There hasn't been many studies on entitlement and these variables in Brazil. However, maybe there's different factors between the Brazil and North America or Asian countries or European countries. So we encourage future research to examine our relationships in other studies. Also, what about other outcome variables? When we look at entitlement and we think about entitlement, how does it impact job performance? Or treating my supervisor, or my relationships with my coworkers? What about my work-family conflict? If I feel like I'm not being rewarded fairly at work, do I bring that home? Does it spill over into my family life? And finally, based on our person situation framework, that theory, are there other variables, either personality or situation, that may moderate the entitlement outcome associations? So we think all of these are great. They're somewhat of limitations of our study, but they're also great suggestions for future research. And as we begin planning our future research, these are easy next steps that we can further in terms of the results in our study and how to extend them. So if you have any questions, you can post this online, post it on YouTube. You can send me an email. Also, if you'd like a copy of the paper, copy the slides, that's my email address. It's harriskj@ius.edu. I'd love to hear from you and look forward to receiving any feedback you may have. Again, my name is Ken Harris. I teach at Indiana University Southeast. My colleague on this paper is Ranida Harris, also at Indiana University Southeast. And we wish you a wonderful virtual conference.